Hey guys, hi, welcome to Ancient Egypt. I've got some friends here today. Go ahead and say hi, guys.
Hey!
It's a rainy day. We had to find something to do, so they're going to help me out today. We are starting chapter 5. You guys know I'm so excited. And Addison, what is lesson 1? What's the title of lesson 1?
The Nile River.
Beautiful. And Violet, can you tell me why it matters?
The Nile River was the most important factor in the development of ancient Egypt.
Beautiful. All right, guys, we got some great notes to take. Ladies, say see you later.
Bye.
See you later.
So guys, the thing we have to understand about Egypt, and there's a reason why I have this red desert in the background, is that everything in Egypt revolves around the geography of the river. Now, there's one big river, that Nile River, running up and down. And a lot of times, if you were just to look at pictures of the Nile River, you'd see some beautiful greenery, some people out fishing or farming, lots of lush land. And, even today, people use the Nile for farming. But the reality is, most of the country looks like this. There's just a tiny narrow strip of land, and we'll look at the map in just a moment. So in ancient Egypt, they would call this, the desert area, the Red Land. And I want you to write that in somewhere in your notes. That's the desert. And they would call the rich, fertile farmland right along the Nile River the Black Land, because it was that dark, rich soil. So that would be the farmland. So the ancient Egyptians were very aware of how much their geography could change in a very short period of time. So if we look at, for example, the Nile River from space, you see this red land here and here. And the black land is this area right along the river. And this is a modern day satellite picture. So even today, there's very, very little fertile land in this area. It's very narrow. So we're going to see some of the effects of that in just a moment. Now, you see this map in yours, so it looks very similar to mine. And we've got our 3 areas here. We're just going to kind of go around that graphic and fill those in. So it is the longest river in the world. It's more than 4,000 miles long. It starts all the way down here in the mountain ranges of what is now the Sudan and travels all the way up to the Mediterranean Sea. It flows from the south to the north into the Mediterranean Sea. So please draw an arrow, and you'll notice I have this arrow right here, but draw an arrow in the direction that the Nile River flows. It flows up, and that's one of the things that, remember I said in class that it's shared with the St. Johns River. The St. Johns River also starts in the south, down near Orlando, and flows up to the north. And so those are 2 of the only rivers in the world that actually do that. Now, it has strong rapids called cataracts. And another word for these are waterfalls. So I want you to write in waterfall. F-A-L-L, waterfalls as well, above these rapids called cataracts. And we actually have a hand motion for this, but before I show you that, I want to show you the picture here. So all along the Nile River are these rapids. And so these created a method of protection from people who live further south along the river, because it would be very difficult to get boats in through these rapids. And there's all sorts of rocks, all these cliffs. So we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But when we say cataracts, we're going to have our cat claws, rawr, and we're going to imagine that our cat claws are big, strong waterfalls. We're going to say cataracts. Do that one more time. Cataracts. I expect that you know that when you come into class. Now, we have a few features of this river that I want to make sure you're really familiar with. Our delta is this triangle-shaped piece of soil up here at the top. And it's where all the sediment that gets washed down the river kind of gets dumped before the river goes into the ocean. So it's a really rich, fertile area. And it's right where the river meets the ocean. And so here's that delta from a satellite picture. You can see all that rich soil that gets washed down the river gets dumped right there. So it's really, really great for growing those plants. Now, ancient Egypt had two regions that it divided up into. It had Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Now here's the thing about this. Upper Egypt, you might notice, is in the southern part of Egypt, and Lower Egypt is in the north. Because we're not talking about up and down, north and south when we talk about upper and lower. We're talking about upper because it's upper in terms of elevation, okay? It's up the river, and it's up in terms of elevation. We know water goes downhill. So when the water is in Upper Egypt, it's higher up, and when it's in Lower Egypt, it's lower down. And let's go ahead and down at the bottom of the Nile, to remind us that the water is flowing downhill, let's draw in some mountains here, okay? Just like in Mesopotamia, that river is going to start up in the mountains and work its way down. So I want you to circle right here where it says think elevation. We know water flows downhill. So in Upper Egypt, it's going to be the part where it is upper in elevation. Lower Egypt, it'll be lower in elevation, closer to the sea. Now, I have a little chant, it's not really a rhyme, a saying to help you remember this, and it's going to seem silly, but that's okay, okay? We're just going to dive in here, guys. So to remember Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, and the Nile Delta, we say, and we're going to point down and then up and make a delta. We're going to say Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, Nile Delta. We point to the south for Upper Egypt. We point to the north for Lower Egypt, and we make a delta or a triangle for that delta. One more time. Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, Nile Delta. And we're going to do that together in class about 1,000,000 times, so just accept it now, get over it. You'll be okay. You'll survive, I promise. One more thing, guys, that's important for us to know about this is that the Nile River flooded twice a year. Just like when we saw in Mesopotamia with the Tigris and Euphrates, and it left behind fertile soil, but it was different because here the flooding was predictable, meaning the Egyptians could predict sometimes down to the day when the river was going to flood, and it would be a slow, gentle flooding. Because the river is so long, think about a water slide. If you have a long, long water slide, that's going just very slowly down. The angle is a lot less steep than it was, say, for the Tigris and Euphrates when it just boop, went straight down like that. So the river flooding was a lot more gentle and people could see it coming. So we could plan around that. We're going to see next some of the ways that lifestyle changed because of how the river was and how much of a main focus it was. So hang on tight. So take a look on the second page of your video notes at the tag that's labeled Early Agriculture. So farmers developed irrigation systems to use the waters of the Nile just like they did in ancient Mesopotamia. So we see some here. We see those canals like we learned about in ancient Mesopotamia, bringing water from the river to the farmlands. And the Nile provided a really stable food supply. So take a look at this picture here, and you can see as far as the irrigation goes, the land is green, the soil is rich. You can see that black soil right there. But as soon as the irrigation stops, boom, desert. And this picture was actually taken by a friend of mine when she went to Egypt. So this is still how Egypt is today. That dividing line is really, really stark. And it's very, very easy to see exactly the difference between areas that are irrigated and areas that aren't irrigated. So the Nile provided a stable food supply beside from the crops as well. We got fruits, vegetables that grew wild, fish, wild birds, all sorts of animals that would come to drink the fresh water of the river. But it also provided many barriers for protection. And I want you to circle this and star it. It's going to be important to know that Egypt was very isolated because of these barriers. They had deserts on either side. The Mediterranean Sea to the north, the Red Sea to the far west, or far east rather, and those cataracts, those rapids. So although invaders did occasionally come to Egypt, it was very rare because Egypt was so well protected. So you can see some of that right here. Oops, that's not the eraser. There we go. So we've got our Red Sea here. We've got desert, we've got more desert. We've got the Mediterranean Sea up there, and then we're going to have cataracts all along the way here. So we are super, super isolated, which is one reason that Egypt's culture became so unique. Now, the second one, we're going to see that kings unify Egypt. By about 3200 BC, so right around the time where we're starting to see some of the Sumerians really becoming powerful, those two Nile regions, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, kind of became two separate kingdoms. They had been little isolated city-states, but they kind of united together. By 31 BC, Menes, who was the king of Upper Egypt, united both kingdoms. And when we say Menes, we're going to say he had many crowns. And we're going to put two fingers on our head. He has two crowns. And he wore a double crown to show the two kingdoms that he united. That white for Upper Egypt and the red for Lower. And he was considered to be Egypt's first real pharaoh because, like Sargon, he united many different areas. And so we use that term pharaoh to mean an Egyptian king. And not just a king, but somebody who is believed to be a god as well. We'll talk more about what that looks like in our Lesson 2 video notes. He founded Egypt's first dynasty. A lot of you saw that word today when we were doing our vocabulary. And it's a series of rulers from the same family. Another way of saying that is it's a family of kings and queens. So when we say dynasty, we're going to say a dynasty is a family of rulers. Now, so that's a hand motion here. We're going to do the letter F. I'm going to say family. That's the American Sign Language word for family. A lot of you have taken ASL, so you might know that. And we're going to put our imaginary crown on here. A dynasty is a family of rulers. So practice those hand motions, guys. They're going to be really useful as we continue our study of ancient Egypt. Okay, so we'll talk more about Menes. And I did want to point out, sometimes you see him being called Narmer. He has kind of two names, and we'll refer to him as both. So if you want to kind of circle that and connect those two, that would work out really well. Okay, and there's his double crown there. And let me just erase all my scribbles here so you guys can see that a little bit better. All right, one last thing. We've got a hot question, and then we will dive in and be finished for the day. So here is Niles, our crocodile here. All right, delicious fish. So he wants you to list and explain at least 3 ways in which the geography of Egypt helped or protected the people who lived there. Now, I should see a little bit more than say fish, water, protection, okay? I would like 3 sentences, and make sure you are actually explaining. You're telling me how the things that you're talking to me about actually helped or protected, okay? So for example, and you can't use this one, you might say that fresh water irrigated the crops. Now, there's plenty more than 3 to be able to work from there. So I expect you to be able to do more than just that one. But I want you to make sure you write all 3 of those. And remember, you do not get credit for your video notes unless they are complete. And getting your hot question is one way to make sure they're complete. All right, guys, I can't wait to learn more about Egypt with you, and we will see you soon. Bye.